Well, good morning. A couple of days ago, I contacted Chief of Police in Gilford, Anthony Bean Burpee, and asked him if he'd have a few moments to have a conversation about all that's going on in our country, coronavirus, and the George Floyd situation, um, and just about life in Guilford. So let's give Tony a call.
Gilford Police, Dispatcher Craver.
Yes, this is Michael Graham over at the Gilford Community Church. Is the chief in?
Hold on.
Morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm fine. How you doing, Tony?
Well, thanks.
Do you have a few minutes for a conversation?
You?
Excellent. I really appreciate that. Just some general questions. First of all, how did you get into law enforcement?
Well, I mean, I got into it. I've always actually kind of as a kid, I think like everybody else, it was either fireman or police, and I've always stuck with it. There was a short period of time where I actually thought I wanted to be a stuntman. But that never panned out, and just always had kind of a passion for helping out in public service, and did a lot of volunteer stuff in high school and then throughout college.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in southern Maine.
Okay.
I grew up in the Wells area. Was born in Sanford.
Yep.
And so did a lot of that stuff. Was part of Big Brothers Big Sisters as a big brother when I was in college, and then just continued on with that. I was the first in my family to go to college.
Very good.
Went to school in Vermont, and then I was big on education. So from there, after I got a bachelor's in criminal justice, I started. I actually came back home. First started working in corrections. I was a corrections officer for 3.5 years before I got into law enforcement full time, and then eventually went back to school and got 2 master's degrees and did some teaching and a bunch of other stuff. So.
Oh, that's neat. And before Guilford, where have you been?
So I worked in. I did just under 17 years in Kennebunk.
Okay.
Which is separate from everybody thinks the port. They have their own agency, but I was actually in Kennebunk. Yep.
I have 2 silly traffic questions for you.
Yep.
The light at Route 11A in Country Club, when you're going to turn right onto 11A,
Yep.
what are you supposed to do with the red arrow?
Yeah, so you can turn. You can come to a complete stop. It's right turn on red.
Yep.
So you can do a right turn on a red arrow.
Okay, that just confuses me a little bit.
Yep.
And what about? And I see people doing this, but a white line on the right side of the road.
Yep.
If I'm making a left turn. If I'm behind a driver making a left turn, what should I do?
Yeah, you need to wait. In other words, you can if somebody's making a left turn, you can go out around them as long as you do not leave the paved portion of the roadway.
Okay.
So I see people all the time that drive and their 2 passenger tires are off on the dirt.
Yep. That
actually is, in most states, it is an offense. You can stop somebody for that. You're not supposed to drive off the paved portion of a roadway.
Okay, so if the sideway was wide enough, you could do that legitimately.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Correct.
I'm glad.
And then the other thing you'll see people do is not really, it is the white line is a fog line. It also delineates a breakdown lane. So then you'll see, like on 106,
Yep.
some people will pull over and drive in that lane for a period of time to make a turn.
Yeah.
To make a right turn so people can continue in the straight lane. So, you're not actually supposed to drive in that lane either, but
Okay.
I think they're doing it to be courteous.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Now, how has the whole coronavirus affected the Guilford Police Department?
Yeah, so for us, we have been kind of doing business as usual. We've just tweaked a few things. When it first started, we closed the police department down. We weren't holding any meetings or anything like that or allowing anybody from the public to come in. We had stopped doing fingerprinting altogether and then doing some registration or what we call VIN verifications on cars. Typically people would come into the station and officers wouldn't hesitate. We have a couple of meeting rooms to call them in and meet with them. And we try to do the whole, face-to-face or go to people's houses and meet with them. So initially when it happened, people could still come into our lobby. It was still open. We've got the window there, which is, bulletproof resistant, so it's pretty thick. So dispatchers could talk to people through the window, and then
Sure.
officers would come in, initially meet with them, and take their complaint or whatever they had to talk about. If they needed to meet with them further, they could ask them to go out into the parking lot, and usually they would go out. The officer, we didn't make it mandatory that officers wore masks. If they wanted to, they could. Or just stand 6 to 10 feet apart and talk to the individuals when they went to homes. call people outside, talk to them on their porches if they need to, or in the driveway. And then if for some reason they had to go, make arrests, they would glove up or put masks on, and then we would require, if we actually made arrests on people, we would actually make them wear a mask.
Okay.
While we were with them in processing. So, and then just recently, as of June 1st, we've actually started doing fingerprints again.
Yep.
And that gets done in our internal room right here at the police department, just off the lobby. So we do make people wear masks, and the officers wear masks and gloves, and we are back to doing VIN verifications. But we're still meeting with people. One of the things that changed, I try to have my officers. I don't like it when calls come in and then people, our officers, it's easier for them. They pick up the phone and want to call somebody. We encourage, as part of our community policing, as officers to actually go out and meet with people at their houses and talk to them face to face. So that had slowed down a bit during this whole thing. We were then taking phone calls over the phone, and officers were returning phone calls rather than going to people's houses. So.
Okay. And when an officer, and I've appreciated the attention to speeding lately in the village.
Yeah.
I really applaud that. But when an officer pulls over a car, especially like an out-of-state car, is there any concern about?
Yeah. So I don't. I regardless of whether it's out of state or in state, now that we've learned so much about people being asymptomatic and everything else. So there is, again, we do not require officers to wear masks or gloves. They can certainly do that. The academy actually came out with a bunch of training videos on that actually gave some suggestions on how officers can do that by approaching from the passenger side, or having conversations with people not actually taking their licenses but looking at to verify who they are and they're the registered owner. So we take precautions and do stuff like that just universally.
Sure.
So, but it's up to the officer. If he or she wants to put a mask on, they can do that. And then they deal with the traffic stop and then go from there.
Okay, that's great. And I have always had a very positive feeling and great appreciation for the Gilford Police Department. And but I'll ask this question knowing that I'm a white, very privileged male.
Yep.
The whole George Floyd, it must sicken you like it sickens me.
Yep.
So how do you react when you see something like that? And obviously this is not an isolated incident.
It's not. I've been doing this for 22 years. I think, unfortunately, a couple things. I have learned over the years that I don't Monday morning quarterback. So I have been doing this for a long time, and I know that officers are dealing with a lot of stuff and have information that the public doesn't have, that people that are standing back watching it unfold at the time or looking at it in hindsight can certainly sit there and critique it all day long, and
Sure.
they are not in the officer's shoes, experiencing what the officer is or has the information that came in about any of that stuff.
Sure.
Now, I have not sat there and watched the entire 8 or 9 minute video, but from what I did see of it, yes, it looks to me obviously that Mr. Floyd was in custody. He was under control. Now, there's a lot leading up to that. You can listen to the phone calls and everything that came in. It's not been shared a lot, and this is not to disparage him. He was a career criminal. He had done time for an assault at which he pointed a loaded weapon with 4 other people at a woman's pregnant stomach and robbed her. He had done time for cocaine possession, everything else. At the time the officers were dispatched, the call came in. He was incoherent. So he had fentanyl and methamphetamine in his system, and he had cocaine on him. So the officer, he probably was not listening to directives, so he needed to probably have some kind of force to be taken into custody. But then, yes, once he is handcuffed and on the ground, then sit him up or do something. I share the sentiment with many of my colleagues in that 8 minutes of kneeling in that position of doing what he was doing is excessive. But unfortunately, I think it is a culture within that agency and with that officer who, you later, these numbers come out, and whether they're accurate or not, I don't know. I'm hearing that, that particular officer had 18 use of force or excessive force complaints against him.
Yep.
As well as that agency themselves, apparently since 2015, there are some statistics going around that over 40 times officers had rendered people unconscious. I mean, that is a cultural issue within the department that is allowed to go on through that many chiefs, and we have processes in place where that would never happen here.
That's right.
So it is disparaging, and then I think unfortunately then we start with the protests and the demonstrations and the call to arms, and now we're going to disband police, and it's this quick reaction to I I would agree. I mean, I make our officers go through. We have some online training, and our officers are required every year, to take implicit and explicit bias training. We are a bit sheltered here. I would like to think that none of my officers have, particularly it's really hard to, I think, identify implicit bias. It all has to do with, how we were raised, where we were raised, what our upbringing was, and what we've been exposed to. So it does sicken me rather that that's happened. I think certainly he should have been fired. I feel bad for some of the other officers that was with him.
Yep.
My understanding is some of those officers were only on the job 2 or 3 months, and they actually spoke up. A couple of them did and said, we're worried about this, we should change his position or whatever else, and that officer said, no, we're doing this. So you've got a 19-year veteran who is telling an officer on the job 3 months, no, this is what we're doing. I mean, I don't blame the officer, the 3-month officer, for not, physically, if it was somebody else, physically would have probably taken that, Derek Chauvin off Mr. Floyd's back and said, this is not acceptable.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot there. So, I try to, my big thing when I do, like I did when I did the talk at the church, I do my coffee with the chiefs, we do our Citizens Police Academy, is to get in there and just, again, to explain to people the thousands of interactions that officers have a day, just a day in this country, and how many of them, unfortunately, if an officer tells you you are under arrest, turn around and put your hands behind your back, and a majority of those go smoothly.
Yep.
We've gotten to a point where, unfortunately, we have a criminal justice system. It is not, by a far stretch, the best there is, but it is what we have, and there is a place to argue if you don't feel that somebody was justified in making an arrest. There is a place to do that, and that is through that system and in the courts, not on the side of the road, which is where so many people say, no, you're not doing this. They're going to argue and fight with police, and now you see other people that are just jumping in and getting involved. It's getting out of control. So we had took the opportunity yesterday, I don't know whether it's in the paper or not, Rick Green from the Laconia Daily Sun.
Yes, it's in the paper today.
Oh, okay. So I need to look it up and read it. But really, I think it's about education and everything else. And the other thing is, we are not. We do a great job here, as far as I'm concerned, in Maine and in New Hampshire. And we're a smaller agency, so it frustrates me that because this happens in Milwaukee with that everybody is painted with the same brushstroke.
Sure.
And we're vilifying all of these officers across the entire country about all this stuff. And I'm sure you've heard these statistics too. I just read this past weekend they had 95 shootings in the city of Chicago. 27 people died. 95 shootings. Where is the outrage for that?
Yep.
Every year there are 250,000 people that die at the hands of doctors due to malpractice.
Yep.
And we're not picketing the doctors, and we're not saying that there needs to be any kind of reform there. They just have medical malpractice insurance, and let's just continue.
Sure.
And so I absolutely understand, that people are outraged, and there seems to be a history of it, but there is so much that's going around and so much information that isn't factual or that isn't fact-checked that people just grab onto. I've talked to my colleagues, and they've gotten emails from people in their community saying that police shouldn't carry guns anymore. It just becomes a huge educational piece.
Yeah. Well, and I feel the same way when some moron Christian does something, some fundamentalist Christian does something at an abortion clinic,
Right.
or protest, gay rights. I don't want to be considered part of that group because of that stupid behavior.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And so, I took some time just to, draft a letter to my agency and, just explaining to them, where we stood on it, and that absolutely, I thought that, that officer was wrong and that he will get his due regard, but that we need to stay focused on what it is we do here, stay with our training. We know that we have a community that supports us. And I've actually not, knock on wood, I have not heard from one citizen in the community.
Yep.
To complain about anything. Last week somebody had sent me we had made a traffic stop, one of our officers did, on somebody, apparently a white female who has, as she put in her Facebook post, a mixed-race husband, and alleges that we stopped them simply because we profile. And everybody was supporting, Gilford does that all the time. I have a black husband, and we get stopped all the time and racially profiled. Now, I've been here 6 years and have not once received one complaint about that.
Good.
And in fact, I talked to the officer, and the guy guy was driving a car without a valid inspection sticker, which is why he was stopped, and we stop people for that all the time.
Oh, I got pulled over once. The officer thought I didn't have my inspection sticker. I did,
Yep.
but he pulled me over anyway.
Right.
So,
And
that happens.
It's a simple clarification, and this,
Yep.
and come to find out, this guy didn't have a valid license anyway. So that probably is the crux of the whole thing. But we're getting to a point where we drag. I was frustrated too. It's just I was reading an article by the Associated Press, and I don't know. Every time we talk about Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, we need to hear about the white officer and the black citizen. And the Associated Press wrote an article. There was a gentleman who retired after 38 years with some agency out west, and he is African American. He was in law enforcement, retired after 38 years, working security for a company for a store during this looting. He was shot in the back of the head and killed, and these kids ran in and grabbed TVs and ran out.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Now they've arrested the individual who shot this gentleman, and the kid, his name is Stefan Cannon. They show pictures of him online. He is black. Now the Associated Press does an entire article, and they mention Mr. Cannon and Mr. Dorn, who is the officer that was shot, and don't say a thing about their race. Not a single thing about their race. But the minute they get to, then of course they come full circle and draw a reference to the fact it was looting is because of what happened in Minneapolis when a white police officer killed a black citizen. So why do they choose, it's just frustrating. If you're going to write the article and talk about race and talk about everybody's, or leave it out altogether because it doesn't even need to be there.
Sure.
I mean, show us pictures online. We can all look at what happened online and tell you that Derek Chauvin is white and that George Floyd is black. But it just becomes that is the tagline. Every time you hear about this incident now, you need to hear about race. And, yeah. So it becomes frustrating. But, I think, Chris and I, as, the deputy chief, Chris Kelly and I just, try to keep these guys focused. We know that we're doing the right thing. That we're not out there getting these complaints. We treat everybody professionally.
Yep.
And having our cameras, has been great too.
Yep.
In the 5.5 years we've had them, I've had 3 complaints from citizens that officers were rude and obnoxious and everything else. I've actually pulled up the videos, have found otherwise, and have invited those individuals in to watch the cameras to
Yep.
see if they can point it out, and they have all 3 declined. So,
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. Now, I know you probably don't want to comment on this, but I wonder if George Floyd had been a white man with the same profile.
Yeah.
I don't think he would be dead today, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, well, I'd be curious to go back. I mean, I guess I don't know for certain either, and I guess I'd be curious to go back if, in fact, this Derek Chauvin had 18 use of force incidents or excessive force complaints lodged against him.
Yep.
What is the race of all those individuals?
Yeah, that'd
And
be.
would I agree that there are officers out there that, exactly like you said, that should not be? I mean, I've seen the ones across the country that have since, been fired for either their actions following this entire thing or running their mouths. And, I think as well, we are held to a higher standard, and we need to be.
Yep.
And that, I see the city of Atlanta has fired a couple of officers. If in fact, I think that needs to be there. I just don't think when we stop people and we have interactions with people, it is because it is something that is suspicious to us,
Sure.
regardless of what their race is, or they are breaking a law or violating a motor vehicle law, and that is why we're having interactions with them.
Yes. And so yesterday I was riding my bike through the village. I shot you an email, and I saw in the hour I was just looping around the village, 5 people pulled over, and 4 of them were, white,
Yep.
male and female. One person I couldn't determine, but obviously race had nothing to do with any of that yesterday, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I talked to that officer. He actually stopped 12 cars in that area, so he did well.
Yes, that's great. Well, Tony, I really appreciate you taking some time, and I applaud you and your department. I think everyone I know has high regard for you personally and for the Gilford Police Department, and we hate when something like this happens, which shouldn't happen. But we hate for people to think bad things of our local police firefighters and police officers, because I think you have a wonderful relationship with the community, and that's probably the key.
Right.
A positive relationship with the people you work with and serve.
Well, absolutely. Well, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mike. It's very nice to hear, and I appreciate the support, and it's very nice for you to take the time to say that. So that's very supportive.
Okay, well, you have a great day, Tony.
Thanks, you too. Take
Okay,
care.
bye-bye.